Hello. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Fantasy Fiends podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Collier, and I'm here with my co-host, Andy Peliquin. And again, we are with Matthew Johnson, and the reason for that is because we filmed an entire episode, and it was actually one of our longer episodes, and it was lost. It did not work. I don't know what happened. Google Hangouts, YouTube, one of the two. Andy, one of the three, excuse me. Something went wrong, so we are back. We are honored again to have Matthew Johnson, who is nice enough to come back and re-record the video. So welcome back, Matthew.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here, and just chatting up is so much fun.
Yeah, we were so entertained and educated by the thing last week that we were just like, we had to do it again. You know, some of the episodes that we've done, you know, we could be okay without, but this one, considering that we're both kind of dark fantasy, evidently not Grimdark writers, we're dark fantasy writers. We were like, you know, this is super relevant to us. So, but before we get into that, this week's episode is brought to you by Dangerous to Know by KT Davies. After Breed, a thief assassin of small renown, is chased by a dragon, tricked by a demon, almost killed by a psychopathic gang boss, and hunted by a ferocious spider, life really takes a turn for the worse. Sentenced to 5 years bonded servitude to a one-handed priest magician, Breed must find the hammer of the ancient hero, known only as the Hammer of the North, within a year and a day, or else. So, with only a drug-addicted vagrant, a rat-faced child, and a timid priest for backup, Breed sets out for the mighty city of Valen and the Tomb of the Hammer. What could possibly go wrong? Grim, dark, and funny, Dangerous to Know is the first book of the epic sword and sorcery trilogy, The Chronicles of Breed. Read for free right now on Amazon Kindle Unlimited and find out more about the author at ktdavies.net. That's DAVIES.net. The world needs a hero, but it's all it's got is Breed. That sounds like a very entertaining book.
Yeah. I've always loved the description of rat face. Like, I've always been able to picture it for some reason. So,
Little beady eyes, long nose.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start with what's something cool that happened to you this week. I really enjoy doing that. I'll start. So I already told Andy this story, but well, it's actually not a cool story. It's actually really embarrassing. So most people know on here that I speak French. I don't like to say.
Here you're getting into the life of Stevie's dating.
Okay, this is dating, but it's embarrassing and hilarious. And on retrospect, it hurts me to tell the story. But I speak French, but I don't say I speak fluently. But this whole time, I took this girl out, and it wasn't really a date. It was a language exchange, but we could tell that we both liked each other. And twice we ended up by my car and we hugged like 4 or 5 times. And I was just so freaking scared. This is like the first time I've ever like talked to a girl and wasn't like, a lot of times when I talk to girls, I'm not scared. I don't really care. But for some reason, this girl had my heart beating fast, my palms sweaty, mom spaghetti kind of stuff, you know? And I couldn't kiss her, and I knew she wanted me to. So this last weekend, I wanted to ask her out on a proper date, and I could not. She doesn't speak any English, so I could not figure out how to say "I like you" in French. All that came up was "I love you," and so I told her in French "I love you," and I couldn't figure out the words to say, but not that strong. Anyway, after like 2 minutes of awkwardness, she finally says, "Oh, you mean je t'adore," which means I like you in French, or I adore you in French, but it's not as strong as I love you. And I drove away feeling like an idiot, like an utter idiot. It was so embarrassing. And then I asked her really stupidly, like, "Oh, you want to go on a date with me?" Oh, so embarrassing. But she said yes. So, hey. Yeah,
but Stevie, I was gonna tell you to put down your coffee because coffee's for closers, but I guess you got it.
I was not smooth. Andy, when he emailed me, he said, "Be chill, you know, be calm, be cool." I was not. I did not take his advice. It was really, really bad. But maybe she likes awkward people. I don't know.
Unfortunately, he didn't take the most important advice, which is not to think about me too much during his date. Unfortunately for him,
My that was true. That was true. I mean, my pants kept getting a little tight every now and then.
way to take it a step too far, Stevie.
I'd never take it too far on the podcast. Matthew's shaking his head like, what the heck? Okay, that's my story. I won't go on any more tangents. Andy, what's something cool that happened to you this week? And that was a lie, by the way.
About the not going off on any more tangents.
Exactement. Exactement.
Okay, so something cool that happened today. Literally, I sat down to start writing the first book in my new series. Got about 4,500 words done in a little over an hour and a half. First chapter knocked out, first of 40 or so. But if all goes well, I'll have it done in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Off to the beta readers with the potential of launching the series before the year ends, which is about 2 or 3 months earlier than I was expecting to launch it. So that's very exciting for me.
That dang, man. I remember when I first met you, I don't think you were writing as many words. If I remember correctly, because you were doing blogs and stuff.
Yeah, I was doing about 2,000 words a day, about 1,000 words an hour back then.
Yeah, and Andy gave me some good advice to be able to fit more words into my schedule as well, and I've been doing that, and it's been working fantastically. Which is, you know, writing 2,000 words, taking a break, writing 2,000 words, taking a break. So that's what I've been doing, and it's so much better than just sitting there and writing 4,000 words for me.
Yeah, definitely. That's one thing that's helped me a lot is just sitting down to write and then walking away. Like instead of feeling like, okay, I got to do more, I know that I have to write 1 chapter today or 2 chapters today. And as soon as I'm done, I am done. I'll go play video games. I'll go hang out with my kids or do stuff with my wife, go drinking, partying, whatever I want to do because it's done.
Mm-hmm. So. Cool. All right, Matthew.
A cool thing, like I said, was I was talking about before, was I finally got my business cards all in. They're all done. They're correct. And
we have to see them, you know.
There it is.
Look at that. Let me a second. All right. So Matthew Johnson, Professor Grimdark. And they shine. That's awesome. And the back.
Yep. The big reveal of the back.
Oh, that is awesome.
Keep it grim, keep it dark, keep reading. It looks, the front looks like a plaque, like an award, you know? So like it's a card you wouldn't throw away. Like you'd feel bad throwing away because it looks like, you know, you took a lot of time to make it.
Yeah, totally.
You should hang those up like at restaurants and stuff. You were like, what is this?
That's something I might actually do. Like go to a coffee shop and be like, boop. See what happens.
That's cool. You could also get it printed out on a sticker and stick it to the back of your laptop so that when you're, you know, or your Surface or whatever you work on, so that when, you know, when people walk by, they'll just see, you know, Matthew Johnson, Professor Grimdark.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah.
Or print it onto a T-shirt.
Yes, that's what I was thinking too.
Right? And the back, that image on the back of the thing, you know, with the dragon and the keep it grim, keep it dark, keep reading. That is an awesome T-shirt idea.
That would definitely. I think that would be. I don't know. I think that might be something that people would want to buy. Actually,
Totally.
That's a really good saying. I've been trying to figure out a way I could print out Stevie Collier shirts and wear one myself without being weird. You know, like go to my steviecollier.com, like right over my chest. It just doesn't seem right. You know, it doesn't work.
Buy my book, please.
Please come buy my book.
Yeah. People look at you like, okay.
Oh man, and I feel like where I live in Texas, nobody reads, so or they don't know what fantasy books are. You know, right. Whenever I tell somebody here in Texas that I write fantasy, I'm afraid they're gonna think I write porno stuff. So I always add, you know, dragons and goblins and stuff. So
it's interesting. I've found that Texas is one of the least progressive in terms of reading. Like a lot of people will read, they'll read a lot of memoirs, a lot of historical fiction and historical books, you know, romance, obviously, because everyone reads romance. But for science fiction, fantasy, even horror, it's not as common there in Texas as say California or New York. It's that whole Bible Belt mentality.
Austin, it's a little better, but anywhere else, it's just like you ask them who Brandon Sanderson, and it's like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, they have no clue. They'll know who Stephen King is, but you ask them any other author, it's just like, why are we even talking about this? I'm not going to be your friend if it's not football we're talking about. You're shit out of luck. One quick thing before we move on, something else cool I did watch the French-Croatia game with 4 French women, and that was freaking awesome. I had a blast. Didn't realize how aggressive people were with soccer. So
soccer fans are the most aggressive people on earth. Like you think you've seen, you know, people at football games or even hockey games, but no, you have not met like an Argentine or a Brazilian or a British fan of the football. And like it's crazy, the things, you know, how like after some of the basketball, the NBA finals, you know, a team wins, they start a riot in their city. Like that's the level that these football fans get up to.
Within 30 minutes of the win, there was a death in Paris. So, yeah, a baguette to the head, I believe it was. Would that be considered racist or culturally insensitive?
All of the above.
All of the above. Stevie takes it too far. Okay, so speaking of baguette to the head, let's talk Grimdark. So that was awesome, man. I should do improv.
That was the best segue ever, Stevie.
Yeah,
that would be a really fun death to write into a story. A dry, stale baguette to the head.
Yeah.
Ooh, or the death like a basket of baguettes falls, you know, 2 stories to kill the guy walking down below. It could work. I think I'm going to write that into a book now, Stevie.
I wouldn't translate that into French, though. I'm pretty sure they'd be upset with that. Also, so we've already done this podcast before, so Andy and I know the steps. I don't know them all by heart, but I do want to say that I worked them into a conversation with people throughout, you know, the weeks since this podcast, and they've actually, the one that I'm getting carried away. All right, take it away, Matthew.
Tell us the 7 critical components of a Grimdark novel.
Okay, so the 7 elements of a Grimdark novel. Number 1 is you have the world at war, obviously, because that's where it's based off of, the 40K. Then you have the extreme violence, the heightened violence, and then you have the amoral characters. Then you have the anti-pastoral. Then you also have the tone of the piece is something that is like, you know, grim or dark or something that's hopeless, despair. Then you also have with the gods are not benevolent at all, or if they're even present in the piece, or sometimes even the characters themselves have taken on the role of the gods. And then finally, the tragic or ambiguous ending.
That's awesome. All right, so let's break them down a little bit for people who were not here for the last podcast and who won't get to see it. So the first one that you mentioned was World at War. A great example of that would be Joe Abercrombie's, I believe it's The Heroes, where the story is centered around this one battle or war. But basically, it doesn't have to be the entire world at war a la Game of Thrones. It can just sort of be like one battle between 2 kingdoms, or basically there has to be some sort of war going on in the world, right?
Yeah. Or even a build up to the war. It doesn't even have to be starting or going on at the time of the book. You have like in Prince of Thorns here, you see that the war is actually not really started, but there's still violence occurring between, you know, different factions. But eventually, as the series progresses, you do see the war actually happens, battles happen. So yeah, they can also be like even in small city states can occur. So it really comes down to, you know, what is the world considered for that novel.
Now let me ask you this: would like war between, say, rival factions, let's say a guild and the law, would that be considered, or is that too small scale for the overall tone of a Grimdark?
That could be the world that they have, definitely, because that's what they know. Yeah.
Right. So kind of as long as the story, let's say in that context, a guild, or even, for example, David Dalglish's Dance of Cloaks, Dance of Blades, Shadow Dance series. It's basically a bunch of different guilds sort of at war with each other. Would that qualify?
Yeah, so if you have like basically the big faction coming together, it creates the violence, and it's usually character driven. So.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so moving on to number 2 was
the heightened violence, the extreme violence.
Yeah, good. Yeah. So when we talked about this last week, it wasn't like, you know, guts and intestines ripping. You know, it's not slasher or splatterpunk or anything like that. It's just the violence is much more present. It's much more
personal.
described. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. You feel the pain. You know, some writers, for example, what's his name? Salvatore. Salvatore doesn't really get into the sensations that accompany the violence beyond the basics, you know, the jarring impact of the blades or tripping or things like that. But then you've got people like Joe Abercrombie who really gets into it. And it's not like there's just blood and guts everywhere, but you feel the pain of the characters as they're feeling it.
Actually, there is sometimes with Joe Abercrombie, the blood and guts are everywhere. Like, it makes people explode. They're like, oh, okay.
Or that like final scene in the Blade itself. Like, I don't want to give it away, but like where he goes insane, basically. Oh, yeah. He totally goes barbarian mode in D&D, you know.
To be fair, if people haven't read The Blade itself by now, they kind of deserve to have it spoiled, because how old is it? 15, 20 years old?
It's 2004.
2004. So 14 years.
It was like reading a work of art plus, or actually I listened to it and the voice actor was just like, why aren't you, you know, making movies? You know, why aren't you an actor in Hollywood? And books like that sometimes don't inspire me to keep writing. So I'm like, I should just give up. I'll never be like this guy, you know? He was, in my opinion, was it my favorite book? No, but I can tell quality, you know, I can see quality writing that the guy crafted each sentence. Like, we're gonna get to Matthew's story later, and you're gonna tell that every sentence was crafted, a lot of time was put into it. And like, if you read some other indie authors besides me, Andy, and Matthew, you'll see like, this is also what I wanted to say was I don't read Grimdark when I'm writing a certain book that's not Grimdark, because I'm actually I have this thing where my style changes with what I'm reading. I'm like a chameleon, and to me it's enough to where it can throw off the book. I noticed this with Harry Potter. There are scenes in the Four Territories where I found that are too childish, and that was because I was reading Harry Potter. So I actually try to read books that are similar to what I'm writing. So it's kind of, so I haven't been reading a lot of Grimdark because I feel like it would really add.
That's kind of like, it's kind of an interesting example of how life shapes art and art shapes life. You know, you're writing and you're reading this book, and it sort of infuses itself into you, and then you read another book and that infuses, and then by the end of your, you know, by the time you reach those 10,000 hours, you're sort of this patchwork quilt of all of these different artists. You know,
true.
I fell in love with Scott Lynch's characters. So every time I think of a character, I'm like, okay, now how would Scott Lynch do this? Brandon Sanderson's world is breathtaking. So I try to think of my world in his terms. My characters, not so much. And now the descriptions from, say, Joe Abercrombie and his fight scenes, I totally want to do that. So, you know, you pull all these bits and pieces to become this unique amalgamation of all of the people who influenced you, and then you're your own artist in your own way, and it really produces some interesting characters and worlds.
For me, Grimdark is like it's so strong. For me, it's really strong when I read it, and I feel like it influences me more than some other pieces of work. Am I right to say that we delve more into the psychological parts of the characters?
You can definitely get into the psychological aspect of characters, because, you know, any good story will be like the character driven. If you're not into the psychological aspect of the character, then you're not really understanding who they are.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say it gets into the psychology as much, but really delving into what drives the characters. Like, for example, in the Heroes by Joe Abercrombie, you see that one guy, the swordsman's desire to not be a total failure, which is how he's feeling. And that is the driving force behind all of his actions. You really feel that. And that's sort of what, you get into that a lot more. Whereas, like, say, epic fantasy, Lord of the Rings, you kind of get into Frodo's motivation maybe a little bit, but you don't get into Boromir and Aragorn and all the other ones until later, or they don't
really
come in.
Gandalf's motivation, because he just disappears.
Yeah,
all the time.
Yep.
Exactly. So it's definitely much more character driven. I would say that would almost be an 8 potential or 7.5, because I don't know many grimdark stories that aren't just totally driven by the character, whereas epic fantasy and even dark fantasy can be more driven by the story itself.
The mood, yeah, the mood can set the tone, especially for dark fantasy. Where that's why I incorporated back into the amoral characters, because that's what they stand out. That's the third step, because it's huge, and it basically helps drive the first 2 steps.
Right. So amoral characters, that's a really interesting one, because it's really hard to write an amoral character. My half-demon assassin, my thief girl, they all have their own morals. The antagonists, they all have their own sense of morality that drives them. No matter how much I try to be fully amoral, there is something that drives them. And so writing a character like that takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of understanding of the human brain that I don't possess yet.
Well, basically, they don't sit there and they don't like like some of the epic fantasy, you get characters who talk about honor, stuff like that. Whereas like in Grimdark, a lot of them don't even think about their motivations. They're just acting like people. And sometimes reacting in such a negative way, or they could be reacting in a way that they think is going to help them to get what they want or what they need. So
right. And so survival, profit, personal gain, things like that. These are often the things that drive grimdark characters.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, survival's a key one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Or sometimes even even revenge, but still even the revenge itself is like still underscored for everything else. So, I mean, they have just the humanistic qualities.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess they really bring out the more negative human traits: greed, envy. You've got these characters who are lusting for power and who are doing whatever it takes to succeed. Maybe they have a little bit of, noble motives. Oh, I want to bring peace to my country, but really they're just bastards that want to be in control. And so Grimdark really focuses on the negative aspects of humanity, as it were. I guess those are sort of the things that drive the characters more.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're always all negative, but
not all negative, but stronger negative than, say, epic fantasy.
Yeah, it's like basically one way to think of it: there are no good guys, there are no bad guys. It's like, and Boromir would be like the closest Lord of the Rings character who is a grimdark character. He wants the Ring of Power to protect his city, but he understands that by taking the Ring of the Power there, he's actually creating an evil act. So.
Right. Interesting. Now, let me ask you this, not totally related. How prevalent is magic in Grimdark?
That's a good question. It's a really good question.
Yeah, that's one I've had a discussion with different authors, and what I found was that magic doesn't have to exist there. It can be very low key. It can be, or something that is prevalent. It can be the whole piece there. It can come from usually a lot of times it ties in with the gods itself. Like maybe they've killed and slain the gods and taken their power, or somehow they've actually themselves have become gods. So, in a way, but would not actually classified as gods.
Interesting. But so I mean, I'm trying to think of, for example, Joe Abercrombie's The Heroes. I don't believe there's any magic, whereas his the blade itself that Stevie mentioned, there is magic in it. I'm trying to think of now. It's hard to find books that actually fit your very specific definition of grimdark offhand. In Anna Smith Sparks' novel, is there magic? Is it prevalent?
Yeah, there is magic, but it's not something that doesn't stand out at all. It's not something that is strong within the piece. Again, it comes down to the priestess figure who is sacrificing. But it's not like magic is not the strong piece, the strong motivating factor. Let me see. I mean, even in Prince of Thorns, the magic is there, but it's done through one figure. With all the tattoos and stuff like that on there, and a lot of it is done through technology in that aspect. So it really comes down to how, again, the author builds that world. Just like it's not like in it's not like in epic fantasy where magic is throughout. Even George R. R. Martin, who is, I don't consider Grimdark, he's epic fantasy. He doesn't use magic as a huge factor either, but it does come into play with the Red Priestess there. What's her name?
Melisandre.
Yes, Melisandre.
Also, the Night King, Bran Stark.
Yeah.
You know,
through the gods too. That's where it comes down through. It's through the power through the gods.
Right. That's interesting. So, so we talked about the gods. How the gods are either absent or simply don't care, can't be bothered,
or they get involved. Again, they're for their own means. We don't know what they are.
So sort of like the Greek mythology gods, essentially.
Definitely like the Greek mythology. That's a very good example of the pantheon. Yeah, and let me see. But then you have them like, you know, in Godblind, where again they're one of the driving forces there. They're pushing this one, the priestess there, to go out there, create sacrifices to release the power into the world, to release the god into the world. And so you do see there is a factor where they have the two warring gods, and but again, it's like they're after their own needs. They're not there to support people. So,
gotcha. Yeah, that's pretty stark contrast with epic fantasy, where the gods are sort of benevolent, you know, either good or evil, like the Dragonlance books, you know, where there's the evil, neutral, and good gods, or you know, like they're much more clearly defined. Whereas I guess in Grimdark, it's like every god for themselves.
Yeah, and not always.
So in Grimdark, are most characters gray?
Gray would be, yeah, that would be amoral, would be the gray zone.
So they just go back and forth, like, oh, they do something good, they do something bad.
Shades of moral gray.
Yep. It's like not even that they may have good intentions, like in Luke Skull's the Grimm Company. You have one character, his intention was to go out to be a hero, but in the process of being a hero, he screws it all up, ends up basically finding himself taken down, and also as a result, he also finds himself gaining power too, which again is one of those powers that kind of manipulates him. It has the positives and the negatives with it. Like he has to, in other words, in order to maintain the power, he has to kill somebody to take a life. Otherwise, he starts dying himself.
Yeah,
like Elric in a way.
Yeah, that's definitely a very common theme in Grimdark, is the value of a life, you know, or the value of one life versus another. You know, you'll have the guy who's willing to kill a city to save his family, or you know, or he's willing to sacrifice his whole kingdom to save his daughter's life, or he's willing to sacrifice his daughter to save his kingdom. You know, you'll have both sides of the scenario where you have people and they're having to question, all right, how much am I willing to do or to sacrifice?
Definitely.
For the sake of whatever I'm trying to achieve.
You can think of like the anti-hero in a way. So the anti-hero is out there moving the story along for his or her gain. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, what they see might be a good for them is really a bad for everybody else.
Yeah.
So.
And will this character usually know it's bad for the other people?
Sometimes they don't care. So it depends.
Sounds like I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, sort of the more heroic end of the spectrum will be like, okay, I'm doing bad, I'm going to try to moderate my behavior. The less heroic is going to be like, I'm doing bad, I'm getting what I want.
Yep.
I'm going to keep doing it anyway. So you've kind of got that whole spectrum, I guess. Yeah,
and some of them are just like I said. It really comes down to that. It's got to maintain that moral gray zone. They're not ultimately the hero, good guy, the Aragorn, where they're going to go out there trying to rescue the kingdom. He doesn't want the kingship. That's not about that. It's all about saving Middle Earth from this giant evil. So the other one might be like, hey, I want to save it. I want to save myself from this evil. And if I save the world in the process, good deal. But usually that doesn't happen that way. Usually I kill this evil and something else worse happens.
Yeah, that's a pretty common theme in Grimdark and dark fantasy too, is sort of the one-upsmanship. You know, it's like, all right, so I killed this small threat, now there's a slightly larger threat. I'm going to kill that one, and then there's another one, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger until you get to the big bad boss at the end, and then the story ends.
Yeah, and what I found was that in Grimdark, it actually allows you to explore different types of characters. I know in The Steel Remains by Richard Morgan, he has an interesting character because he has a protagonist who is a gay character, only he doesn't act like, they don't put the stereotypical gayness to him. In other words, he's not out there like you would see in some Hollywood film, how they would overindulge in some of that, maybe heighten some of that. And here, he's actually, you wouldn't know if he was a gay character, but except for some of his actions, so, who's he sexually attracted to, and and some explicit scenes. So,
I wanted to ask you, are there any video games that are grimdark?
The Witcher?
The Witcher's grimdark.
Yeah.
So would you say that the I can't pronounce the author's name, but are those books also grimdark?
I think that people usually call them grimdark. They fall in that category. I haven't actually read them myself, but I think they fall in there.
I feel like the ending, they're sort of positive at the end, which is why I probably like the. I read The Last Wish, which also I'm not, which is like a thing of stories, and each story had a semi-positive ending for me.
It's funny. I just put together a list of the badass fantasy anti-heroes, and the more I read about Geralt of Rivia, the less I believe that he's an anti-hero. Like he's a tragic hero. Like it's all about the tragic of his situation and all of that. But he's not actually an anti-hero. He's very much a hero in his own way. Like he's only killing the monsters. He's not killing people. So it's very visible. Like it's I would almost say it's more dark fantasy than grimdark. Maybe the overall tone and some of the other details of the world fits, but definitely he's a hero fighting monsters. I mean, that's like what's it called? Bram Stoker's Dracula, just done it a different way.
Yeah, it's like I said, I haven't actually read the actual books themselves, so for me to get into it and say, yeah, that definitely is, I would have to actually take a look at the whole series. And what you're saying about the ending itself, if you got like a kind of a positive feeling, but at the same time, it still didn't like leave you feeling like, oh, this is a great happy ending. The world was restored.
It didn't.
Well, that's another one of the features of grimdark, right? Is that ending? Yep,
it's ambiguous. So we're like, oh, in some moment, I'm like, yay, the hero kind of got what they wanted, but it wasn't what they wanted. Yeah, like
maybe he slayed the villain, but then I don't know if, for example, in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, I'm gonna spoil this because it's super old. At the end of book one, they slay the Lord Ruler, the big bad guy, and it turns out that he was keeping another bigger evil at bay. That would be a pretty classic grimdark ending, right?
Yeah, but Sanderson is definitely not grimdark. No,
but that specific ending, I mean,
definitely. Like for example, grimdark ending would be, let's say in the Broken Empire. I don't want to go into Broken Empire because people haven't read that. The first law trilogy. Okay, so basically how it ends are that people, they defeat an army, but they find that they're actually, one finds that he's a puppet to another person.
I loved that.
And another person, he's broken, but he remains broken, and he remains the same. He doesn't he's got a little bit more power, but at the same instance, his body's still the same.
Yeah.
And other novels, like Richard Morgan, you don't know what happened because the character has this heroic rush, and then it cuts to an kind of like an epilogue where this like newborn baby's given to people, and they come up with names, and the name of a character comes up, and I'm like, so what happened? So that's where it's ambiguous. Whereas a tragic ending, the tragic ending is where they get where they think they got something, but they don't. Prince of Thorns, that has a very tragic ending in a way. So, most of them, a lot of them tend towards a tragic because that fits into the mood, the despair, the tone, all that. It fits all that.
Well, let's move on to the tone then. The overall tone of the book, you said, is pretty it's almost gray. Is sort of what you get, no?
Yeah. So okay, let's go with the anti-pastoral first because that actually will help blend into world building. See, in the anti-pastoral, the cities are dark, dirty. You got full of people on drugs, selling their sex and all that stuff all around, right? And it's dangerous. You could be killed in the city. But once you leave the safety of those walls, then, because in a traditional pastoral story, the world is all happy. You're trying to save it because it's good, it's kind, it's there giving you power. But in a grimdark fantasy novel, the world itself is trying to kill you too. Like you enter out into the woods and there's creatures going to devour you. Or like, you know, in the Court of Broken Knives, you have a dragon in a desert. So like, definitely.
I feel like Grimdark adds a more realistic tone to fantasy. Like these are the things you should be expecting if you actually lived in a fantasy world. And I don't write Grimdark, but I do add those aspects. I take a lot of time. That, and I also which I think we said wasn't Grimdark, but whenever a person kills another person in my book and we're in those thoughts, like it's a huge psychological problem for them. You know, they actually go through that. But definitely whenever my characters go anywhere, there's realistic problems like mud, infection. Even though I don't write Grimdark, I've always had a problem reading books that didn't add that stuff in there, because I'm like, so they just rode through a jungle for 2 weeks and didn't get one scratch. I can't do it. I gotta have something there.
But even Grimdark, going back, the characters sometimes will suffer from the effects of, like, you know, killing somebody. It does impact them overall and does change them, and to a point sometimes where if they continue doing so, that's where it becomes.
What kind of people like Grimdark? This is a question I wanted to ask last time but forgot.
Oh, there's like a huge group on Facebook, readers and writers of Grimdark. So I can't, like, you know, profile somebody who's a Grimdark reader.
What would they be looking for though? Why would we want to read something like that that's gray and could leave you cold, could leave you like wow, I'm really glad I'm depressed now, you know? Like when I left The Blade itself, I was like, it left me thinking. I think that's why I like Grimdark, because it always makes me think more. I feel like with some fantasy, it's more theme park, like a theme park MMO. Like I could just go through it and I know at the end it's going to be good. Grimdark, I feel like I have to think more.
Because again, it's about the characters and what happens to them. So for me, it's about caring about the characters. Even the ones that you think are most despicable, I'm like, I have to care about them. If I don't care about them, then just like any other reading, then why am I reading it? And if they go through the stages there, you know, basically the human, it's about the human aspect of life. So, you know, what does it mean to live in a world that is this way? What becomes of people? How does it shape and change you?
And so after the tone being gray, what's our next step?
So I think we covered just about everything all in that.
So list them for us one more time.
So we covered the world at war. We've covered the violence. We covered the amoral characters. We covered the gods and goddesses. We covered the tone. We've covered the anti-pastoral and the ending. That's all 7.
Yeah, I think my favorite of all of them was the anti-pastoral, just because it's so at odds with classic fantasy. You know, you've got fantasy, you've got these sprawling. I mean, look at Lord of the Rings. These beautiful scenes. You know, it's just gorgeous, and Mother Nature is just filled with so much beauty. And then you listen to hikers, you know, who went for a day hike and got lost for 2 months, or you know, you hear about people who crossed the ocean and everything terrible that could happen to them did. And then, you know, it sort of brings it back to the other side that there is a lot of danger. And so that's kind of an interesting use of nature, using it as an antagonist, as a secondary or tertiary antagonist for the characters, you know, not just like, okay, I've got to get to the other side of the mountain, but sort of like how in Lord of the Rings, the storm forced them to go underneath. You know, had the storm been, like in the book, I think the storm was just a storm rather than in the movie Saruman was bringing it.
Yeah, no, this was the giants. Actually, in the book, the giants were throwing rocks down on them.
Okay.
Yeah, which would kind of look weird in a cinematic format.
In the Hobbit?
This would be in Lord of the Rings when they're trying to cross over instead of going under the mines of Moria. They're trying to cross the mountain. Yeah, and they're all like throwing the rocks down at them, and they're all like, okay, I guess we got to choose the path.
Yeah, when I just rewatched that the other night, and I'm like, how the hell did they not fall off that tiny ass cliff when it's moving? It makes no sense. And they like no scraped elbows, no scraped knees, nothing.
No
And it's
frost.
wet. Yeah. And the only person who falls is Bilbo, right? It's just like everybody should have been dead 5 seconds into that fight scene, you know? That's just me. My favorite part of the Grimdark things the characteristics that we went over today was the fact that everything's trying to kill everything. You know, like walking through the jungle, like we said. And another what came to my mind is like if you're walking through a bazaar and it's like a dirtier bazaar, you know, like you're in the bad part of town, maybe a hobo who's crazy would like slip out a knife and try and cut your shin for no reason at all. I don't think you'd find that in fantasy because I feel like that would be it takes away from the story, but in this it adds to the tone. Like shit, this is a nasty ass city, you know?
Well, yeah, that's definitely part of the world building. I mean, so many times you go into a marketplace, you're kind of expecting someone to try to rob the main character, you know, unless he's you know full on armor. If he's just if he's the hero or the heroine and they're walking through a marketplace, you can pretty much expect that something bad's gonna happen.
Yep. Yeah, and even then, sometimes the bad things can happen is them.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
before we get into the readings, I do have a question. Where does sex come into with Grimdark? Is it usually more detailed? Is it not important? Or is it just like anything? It depends on the author.
Choice. A lot of times it can be some authors use it to show violence, like the personal violence on a person, like sex can come in there and be unwanted, like in the rape scenes that they have. Some of them are graphic and some are not. But usually it depends on who the author themselves. Okay. But I'm trying to think. I know that some of them, like I know Joe Abercrombie, he has it. It's there. It's like for like a paragraph or something like that, or 2 paragraphs. And
or fake the black stuff, no, right?
It kind of moves on, and you get like the emotional aspect of the character, and then it shuffles along.
What about Godblind and The Court of Broken Knives, both of which are written by women, and historically women tend to infuse more sexuality into their stories. What? Do they have sex scenes?
Oh, well, see, I found the least in those 2.
But I'm saying, like, historically, as you'll see, most romance writers are women. When you read fantasy, when you read paranormal, you'll find that there's a lot more sex in female written books. Not that it's a hard and fast rule. It is just a fact that female written novels are more prone to having that sort of things, often because guys are just plain old crap at writing sex scenes properly.
hey, speak for yourself.
Oh, Richard Morgan actually made a pretty, interesting scenes there, even though
it might be spicy. No, they're like with everything else, there are always exceptions to the rule. There are people that defy statistics, but I found actually it's a thing that a lot of authors will hire a female ghostwriter to write those scenes specifically for them.
Interesting.
Because the male approach to sex, as it were, and then of course writing sex scenes is vastly different from the female's approach to sex.
It's just and bang and go, huh? It's just like
I don't know.
Maybe that's your approach, Steve.
No. All my sex scenes have ball gags in them, and it fixes the entire scene instantly.
But the 2 authors you mentioned there, they're nothing. I mean, no more graphic, no more less graphic than you have in the other ones. I mean, like I said, Richard Morgan has got the most graphic sex scenes that I've read in a fantasy novel. Period.
Okay. No, it was just something that I was interested in because I haven't read either of those 2. I haven't read a lot of Grimdark written by female authors just because there aren't so many. There's Anna Stevens, the Godblind series. There's Anna Sparksmith, The Court of Broken Knives. There's M.L. Spencer, who does her Ren Wars series.
Mm-hmm.
Close enough. But other than that, there's not that many.
Yeah, like I said, when I was first researching, reading, one of my professors in my program, he's like, "You've written about all these guys. Are there any female writers who do Grimdark?" And I'm like, "That's a big question." So that's when I actually went to the boards and I asked, and like they gave me a bunch of names, and some of the names I read, like Robin Hobb, they gave me, and I'm like, yeah, she doesn't fit. And then like I said, the two that fit the best are Anna Stevens and Anna Smith Spark. Those are the ones that actually match up the most. Because like I said, I checked out all the other ones they gave me, and there was a very short list. Unlike the male authors, because I think this might be typical of fantasy too. The male authors, especially since how in the publishing industry used to be heavily dominated by middle class white writers, male writers.
Yeah. I know that the fantasy genre as a whole is definitely women are taking it by storm in a very good way. A lot of, especially the indie authors, a lot more women are writing fantasy, and they're producing some absolutely fascinating things that I think a lot of guys wouldn't create, because women tend to focus more on different things. For example, colors, music. Those are two things that women just tend to focus on more than men.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's
and there are some fascinating stories driven by color and music written by men, but then there are a lot of them written by women as well that they're more important, or they're more critical, they're more central to the story than you would see. Now, there again, always exceptions to every rule, but that's something that I've seen.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, there is essential maleness in some aspects of fantasy, especially a lot of the sparseness, especially like they have those funny memes about describing women, how a male author does it versus how a female author does it. It's all like, oh, and look at the boobs, and the boobs are boobing, and they're boobing along.
Bouncing boobily.
That's the old way.
I'm starting to think I'm like a feminine author, because I don't think I've ever described boobs or butt yet, which is surprising. And my stories, I love adding color. So
again, like
I'm the anomaly.
No. There are guys who focus on those details to a great extent. For my news story, the color of the headband denotes the caste, the rank, and it's just a detail that I thought of, and I'm going to write it in the Night Guild series, the Queen of Thieves series. The color of the trim on the robes denotes the house of the Night Guild.
I love that stuff.
Is important, but I'm saying that women tend to focus on those things more. Like if you read a lot of descriptions, let's take George R.R. Martin when he describes Cersei's dress. Yeah. There's almost no detail. Now you read almost any female written fantasy author, and you'll find that the dress gets 2 or 3 sentences, maybe not, but often the clothes, the hair, things like that, they get more attention because those are the things that women notice more than men.
Yeah, it definitely could be the case there. I mean, it also depends on if their book is plot driven or character driven too. Yeah. So I don't know. I can't make any type of claim or anything that you're saying with that one. I'm like, it's very interesting, definitely.
It's very interesting. It's fascinating and I totally believe it. We read somebody on the podcast. It was that book, Andy, where it might have been ML Spencer, where that guy is, or that girl is half vampire or whatever. Or no, she goes in that bar with those vampires. Well, anyway, there was a lot of color in it. It was a lot of color, and his fashion was described very well, and so that's what it reminded me of. So that's why it was fascinating to me to hear that. But I totally believe it too. But like we said, everybody, there's going to be exceptions. So do you guys want to get to the reading?
Absolutely.
This was fun. Andy, you did such a great job narrating last time. Do you want to hit that up?
Totally.
Matthew, last time you didn't have a part. Did you want to have a part in this? Did you want to read your own character and I'll read the girl?
Oh, no. I want you to keep doing it. You guys are awesome.
Okay, sure. Andy, did you want to do the guy or the girl? Or
no, you do them both. I'm going to do a ton of reading.
You were amazing. Honestly, I love what you had there. I loved it last time. It was brilliant.
I don't remember what I did, but I'm going to try.
That's good.
Okay, I'm good to go.
All right, here we go. Vicious heat sweated from his burned scalp, raising blisters that seeped viscid pus, repeatedly scabbing over and cracking open. A blood-crusted hole marked where his left ear had been torn off. Razor wire bound his arms and legs to the wooden post, secured by a spike driven through the radial bones. Bloated hands flexed numb fingers, marking the passing moments before he died. The moments stretched out into hours and then days, and yet he still lived. Days ago, soldiers raised his post, razors slicing flesh and bones cracking under his weight. They secured it in the ground through ropes tied into stakes, wagering how long he would last. After the last stake was pounded into the hard dirt, they agreed on getting drinks and left him alone. They would never know who had won. Not once they returned to check on him. He'd expected visitors, a widow to curse his name and spit at him in the very least, or an orphan to throw a stone at his skull. No one did. 2 days passed. He was alone, drying under the hot sun. On the morning of the third, a black shadow crossed his blurred vision, deftly landing on the wooden crossarm.
Are you Death?
Hope crept into his voice and he bit his tongue. He didn't want to suffer long, but God's damn it, he wouldn't beg. He'd seen men take days to die, pleading in dry, hoarse whispers, tongues too shriveled to form words. They grunted, "Let me die! Let me die! Let me die!" Followed by bouts of cackles, until they wrinkled up like prunes, desiccated bodies collapsing in on themselves. The raven blinked, cocked its head, one black eye staring into his. In that moment, he understood this feathered priest. He was waiting for his confession, to absolve his sins before partaking of the communion meal. "This is my eyeball. Eat in remembrance of me."
Fuck off.
He said.
I'm too fresh.
The raven didn't fuck off. It hopped closer. Taloned feet clicked over the razor wire unimpeded. Gurgling sounds came from its throat. Laughter. The fucking bird was laughing at him.
Eat shit and die!
Its beak shot out and he turned his face away, a sharp pinch on his earlobe. He growled, shaking his head in hope of scaring his tormentor away. The lobe stretched and then tore, peeling from the bottom up. He screamed, wetness spreading across his face, a shifting of weight on the wood, and he saw his dark tormentor soaring away, a glob of flesh dangling from its beak.
I'll kill you, bastard!
He screamed, voice cracking. At that moment, he understood death wouldn't be quick. Killing is never ending. Like, once you start taking a shit, you've got to finish. It's a messy piece of work, sometimes coming on you unexpectedly. The urge impossible to ignore. You feel bloated and sick, even as you stand over the bleeding corpse, yet there's a sense of relief, a hollow emptiness close to euphoria. When I returned home to find no home standing, the urge to take a shit was real strong. While I'd bloodied my sword on the blue-painted Celtic goat prickers along the east bank, the bastard Forseth marched up from the south, looting and burning our villages. It had to be Forseth, because he was a cowardly shit, waiting for the warriors to leave before taking everything we had. I came upon the first ruins, my mouth went dry and my skin turned icy. Then a second, and finally my own. Ash and stone and broken bodies scarred the land where farms once stood. Forseth's men took everything. Livestock, grain, women, and children. Nothing remained for me except a whole lot of killing to start up again, a whole lot of shit to take care of. I was one man, the last remaining warrior to return to my village. I couldn't do it alone. Ursoth was to the west. Forseth, more of a mangy cur than wolf, didn't have the stones to attack a place as big as Ursoth. Murder, pillage, rape, and run to the hills was his style. My sword thirsted for the blood of these cowards, to take back a measure of what I lost. Carrying my meager belongings, I took the road west. Moonlight was my sole companion, illuminating ghosts among the trees. The people who once traversed these paths, herding sheep and cattle, carting grain or goods to nearby villages, were all dead. Sorrowful eyes stared out at me, bodies split apart, limbs missing and blood drenched. These silent watchers kept me from straying off the path. The heat of daylight burned them away, allowing me to escape their daunting gaze. By day, I swore to avenge them. Let the soil drink their murderers' blood. I slept away from the road, and the very trees haunted at night and dreamt of blood and screams, waking sweaty, heart racing. One morning, the world full of screams bled from my head into reality. I woke and heard a woman's shriek. Grabbing my sword, I hunted the sound. A young woman darted between the trees, running blind and glancing over her shoulder more often than looking forward. 2 men scurried after her, gaining on her until they were a few paces back. I pressed against a tree. Panic radiated off her as she rushed past. I let the first man go, drawing a dagger from my belt. As soon as I heard the second stomp through the bush, I let him pass a step or two beyond before leaping from behind. My blade sank into his neck, driving up through his skull. He toppled, taking my dagger with him. I let it go and chased after the first man. He caught the girl by then, wrapping large arms around her and dragging her to the ground. Her head smacked on a root, and I heard her cry out.
Got you, bitch.
The man said and laughed.
My, you'll make a fine wife. Hey, Gallard, won't she make a fine?
He turned back, and the smile on his face fell away. My sword sliced through his neck, warm blood spattering over my arm and chest. The man's head thumped against his chest, and he dropped on the girl, spraying her with his life's blood. She screamed again, smacking his slack face and making the head jounce. More blood squirted over her. I grabbed the body and rolled it off her. She rewarded me by kicking my shin, boot heel grinding against bone.
Shit!
I limped back, dropping my sword and holding my empty hands out to her.
I'm not gonna hurt you. Who are you?
She dug her palms into the dirt and shoved away from me.
The one who saved you from these bastards.
I knelt beside the nearly decapitated man. He had a brand over his left eye, 3 squiggly lines, horizontal like worry lines, painted in black dye. A Forseth man. I spat on his gaping face. Then I tore his head from the scraps of sinews and flesh, attaching it to his shoulders. I drop-kicked it. The head spun through the branches and skidded across the ground. One more ghost to haunt me. The woman stared at me in horror.
Why'd you do that? I owed it to him and the other.
I retrieved my sword and wiped the blood on the dead man's ass.
They killed every man in my village, took the women and children. They would have taken you too, made you a wife and sewed their bastards in you. 2 less now for me to kill. What are you going to do with me? Nothing. I have my own problems without carrying someone else's. Can you help me get back to Ursoth?
I walked away.
Please. I know some people, warriors like yourself, they can help you as payment for helping me.
Temptation hangs like overripe fruit from the lowest branch for a hungry man to devour. The gods take and the gods provide. I just didn't know which this was, but I reached for it anyways. Hungry men have to eat. Fine.
Keep close and try not to make any sound.
I heard her tramping along behind me.
My name is Kareth. Kareth Dainsford.
I said nothing, my teeth ground together at the name. Dainsford, Thane of Ursoth. Damn bastard sent us to war against the Kelty while he sat fat and drunk on his wicker throne. Oh gods, here I was, rescuing his daughter. Low-hanging fruit. I hooked my bloody thumbs into my belt and tried to ignore her.
I swear it's better a second time.
That was really awesome, man. Great job.
Definitely. I love to hear you guys read that. You brought some life to that piece.
Good.
I the inspiration for your main character was from Master Chief from Halo. I tried my best. Yeah. He's such a hard voice to do. But man, so good. So very good. I loved it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So awesome. Is there anything else we want to go over for Grimdark?
I think we covered main elements. I mean, you guys have any other questions or anything that?
Just, where can people find you and what work do you have out there? Do you have any Grimdark pieces out there as of yet? I know you're trying to shop around your book for a publisher or a literary agent.
Yeah, right now, basically, I have 2 stories in an anthology coming out to be released from Crossroads, and they'll be out hopefully next month if there's no more delays. And then,
and your YouTube channel, right?
Yes, I have my vlog, Professor Grimdark, on YouTube. Same place. You can find me at www.professorgrimdark.com. So, and everything will be all linked into that. So anyone is interested, they can go check that website out.
Very cool.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for this episode. So you can find Matthew Johnson at professorgrimdark.com. You can also find him by searching Matthew Johnson on amazon.com, right, Matthew?
No, I don't have anything on Amazon anymore.
Oh, it's not on Amazon. That's right. You pulled everything, right? Or you didn't have anything?
Oh, I pulled it.
Okay, cool. Well, you can still find his website at professorgrimdark.com, also by searching Professor Grimdark on YouTube. It's the first thing that pulls up. Definitely give that a check. Definitely check that out. As also subscribe and like his videos as well as ours, because that helps us all tremendously in the great world of YouTube. Guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. It was a lot of fun recording it a second time. That's how much we love you guys. So this is Stevie Collier. We wish you a great night, and we'll see you. It's next week, right, Andy? Tomorrow. We do have it tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah, so tomorrow for another episode of the Fantasy Fiends podcast. Goodbye, everyone.